thank you for being with us today. This will be a brief session, but let's go through a couple quick slides here to get us oriented, and then we'll take it from there. Stuart? Next slide, please. So this is the team that conducts these webinars, the customer success consultant staff. And again, our job is to assure your success, your adoption, and maximize your use of the tool. If you have suggestions for webinars, please let us know. It's difficult to open these webinars up for audio sharing. The background noises, etc., make it very difficult. But we very, very much want your engagement. Use the question and answer tool in the user interface of your Zoom meeting. If you have questions, please ask them. And if you have questions after the fact that you thought of or want clarity on, please ask us afterwards also. The recordings of this webinar and all that we've been conducting are on our support site under Solutions in the Softvision Suite Educational Webinars section. So if you want to refer back to this in the future, you'll have access to it. We also intend to deliver these in follow-up emails, and even those that don't participate will have it as a reference. So I want to speak real briefly about, what is Venture 21, a little bit about how it may differ from Forecast 21. Then Janine and Linda will run through a few screen concepts to sort of set the stage for Stuart demonstrating the application with us. This is intended to be a basic exposure session, and we'll do a deeper dive in the future. Venture 21 differs in that it's taking all of your historical demand and automatically projecting it into the future. And we use several different statistical and varying forecast methods to derive a future forecast from your past sales. And Linda and Stuart will get into those a little bit more. But, what's the best fit, most appropriate for your type of business at the highest level or at other levels below the highest level? So very hierarchical and or categorically driven as most of our businesses require. For new items, a like item concept is certainly still in play, and that I can take the sales of a historical like item and use that to model my future. I can also model by linking to hierarchy or category levels. So for this new item, I expect it to behave like the category average, less 20%, is one option of many that you can use to seed a new item. There is lost sales functionality within Venture. And we certainly have reports to help show where items are performing differently than planned. Next slide, please, Stuart. Venture really shines when you've got a pretty consistent assortment. It does really well in business-to-business environments. It does well in business-to-consumer, again, where you've got sporting goods or a consistent assortment. Doesn't mean we don't handle new items well, but that high volume, frequency of demand is really where it shines. Venture is a web-based application, so when you launch it from the dashboard, which Stuart will show you, it opens a web browser to manipulate the screens. It can sit beside Forecast 21, or it can be used by itself. So we have both cases where that occurs. Venture relies on you sending me your assortment. in the interface files, similar to how we're all used to it now, you send me the assortment, the start date, the end date, and then we take it from there. There's not a front end like maps per se. One of the really, really strong features that our customers like about Venture is that there's less potential or opportunity, if you choose to take advantage of it, of user bias, user influence. Now, you can control as much or as little of the output as you choose, but if you let it do its thing, once dialed in, once the appropriate method is set, you remove the emotion that some of us encounter now with our planners. Well, gosh, I really like the item. Gosh, that vendor doesn't perform so well, so I'm going to forecast it a little higher, which is certainly a poor methodology, but not uncommon. So any of those types of biases can go away with Venture, which is a strong benefit. On the Forecast 21 side of the fence, if you're familiar with that, it's very, very hierarchical in that category, subcategory are very important levels within the planning hierarchy, and they're pretty restrictive. Venture can be configured to have, a very different hierarchy if you choose, or we can use the category, subcategory hierarchy, or we can use other attributes to build hierarchies from. So it's a little bit more flexible in that manner. And it may seem logical, but it's important to understand that the forecast output from Venture, once you are comfortable with it, as is the case with Forecast 21, once you validate and publish, once you are confident in your settings, inputs, out, and its output, feeds into master scheduling as a demand plan to then manage your inventory too. So let Janine now describe a couple screens, and these are top touch, most frequently, commonly used screens, and sort of set the stage for what Stuart will show us.
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Jeff mentioned, the Venture 21 is web-based, so there's a slightly different look to it when you open up the screens compared to the other modules, particularly master scheduling, things like that. So this is the main dashboard that you have for Venture. There's quite a bit going on here. We have whatever hierarchy you establish for your business is displayed on the left, and we give you quite a few search options to, filter by status code, filter by performance, things like that, to isolate down to a particular section or product. We also give you the option to actually key in the product number if you know it off the top of your head. On the right half of the screen, we have what we call widgets, and these can be customized. There's like a top section, and then there's a bottom section, and you can place the different windows that you feel you will reference the most in the order that you want to look at them. So what we have as an example here is the forecast graph. So it will display the history depending on which level you're on. If you're at the company, subcategory, category, product, you'll see the history. The red line that is in the middle of the graph, that indicates for you that this is the physical week you're in currently. And then anything obviously past that is your forecast. So you'll see your patterns of the forecast out there. There is legends so that you can display if you start having a lot of activity on the graph. You have a legend that'll help you keep track of it. We also give you the options to add other data elements to the graph. So if you're doing historical overrides, which is similar to unusual demand that the Forecast 21 side of the business uses, if you do events, things like that. The two panels that we have open on the bottom half of the screen is history and forecast method. So the history, we give you the option to display in the fiscal week, or if dates are more relevant for you, you can have dates display. We show the history in weekly, monthly, or quarterly buckets, and we give you 2 years worth of history to reference on the screen, and we also give you your current working forecast and a new forecast if you tend to tweak any of the forecast method information. Your forecast method will show what is set here and gives you the options to link, where Jeff mentioned if you want to link new products to a different node to get their history to form the base of your forecast. We have, and you can actually, what's great about this is you can select different methods and apply them to see what the graph changes to, and then if you decide you like that new pattern that you're seeing, you can save it. If not, it'll just revert back to what you had there previously. All right, next screen, please. All right, so as I'd mentioned with the forecast graph, you'll see trend, you can use trend lines. There's several of those. We have units display, or you could display in dollars. You can do year over year. It really is pretty flexible to what you want to see and display on the screen. The other little tidbit is on any of the dots that are in the graph, if you hover over them, it'll display the actual date. It'll show you the units for that particular week or the dollars for that particular week. All right, next screen.
Hey, Janine.
Yeah?
Somebody asked a question. Can you link to a discontinued model, and how does it capture demand?
Can you link to a discontinued product? Yes. You can link to any product that still exists in your database. And it's looking at the history of that product and using that as the pattern to build the statistical forecast go forward.
And just like on the Forecast 21 side of the fence, the demand that we capture is gross demand. So if you enter an order in your order management system and send me that order, it is demand. And we plan against gross demand on both sides of the fence.
All right, so here again is a closer snapshot of the history and forecast method widgets on the screen. There's just so much information available on the screen and different methods of viewing that you can change constantly on what you want to do. The forecast method will show, if you have it linked, it'll show you what it's linked to. When you have the expert method chosen, it'll actually tell you the statistical model that it's using, and you can actually click into that link and look at all of that information that pertains to it. And you have your other settings here as well, depending on the forecast method that you choose. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Linda.
And Linda, go ahead and answer the question that additional question we got as you get started, please.
So a second question we received is, so would we go back and remove the link once we have demand for the new item? So no, you do not have to remove the link. Once the system has sufficient demand to be able to determine a forecast method, it will begin to use that forecast method and assign a separate forecast method for the product. So we're going to talk about the difference. So Janine mentioned forecast methods. So Venture offers 8 different forecast methods that you can choose from. We're only going to talk about the 5 most common ones that we use today. So the first and most common method that people use is expert. And so as Janine mentioned, this is a statistical forecasting method, and it's going to look at multiple options and sales patterns to determine what is the best forecast method to use. So it'll review the demand for a given hierarchy or for that given product, and we'll determine what that optimum forecast method is, looking at MAPE and determining what has the least MAPE or deviation based on the forecast method. It is best used with high volume products and or your merchandising hierarchies as we set defaults. So a second forecast method that we have is 1 year seasonal. So this forecast method requires a minimum of 1 year sales history, and it will assign a seasonal forecast pattern based off of that most recent selling year. So it is best used for products that have a high sales volume or a high degree of seasonality. Some good examples might be air conditioners or heaters. Our third forecast method is referred to as same as last year, or you'll hear us refer to it quite often as tally. It basically uses the last 52 weeks of demand with an index. So you can assign an index to determine if that sales pattern should be adjusted up or down for that particular product. So it will work for any product where we have 52 weeks of history. We do recommend when users are using Sally that they develop some type of a tool to provide their team an average sales pattern. So what is the average sales for a particular product in the company? What is an average sales for a particular product in a category or subcategory? So when users are determining what that lift should be, they can look at those average based off of what they have set as their default method. They can look at those averages and determine what the lift should be assigned, whether it be up or down. A fourth forecasting method is basically just a flat method. It allows users to go in and they can assign a flat amount of sales per week or per month. It will also look at average sales or it'll look at a specific number of weeks of history and it'll calculate average sales. So you can say, looking at the last 6 weeks, what are my average sales, and use that as your flat method. This method is best used for slow moving product or products where you have a really short lead time, and whether they're short lead time high or low volume. So another option is called multiple. And that is best for products where you have two very distinct sales patterns based on the time of year. So you may, for the first, or for 9 months of the year, run with a very flat sales pattern with almost no sales or very small sales. And then you may have some seasonal period of time wherever within the year, and it allows you to accommodate a different sales pattern for that particular seasonal time. So users determine basically which method they want to use, when they want to use it, and the system will automatically switch back and forth based off of those two methods. So during a venture implementation, your CSC team will spend quite a bit of time with the users to determine what's the best method to assign based off of their sales volume, their sales patterns, the product assortment that is out there. So one key walkaway though, venture forecast methods are not set and forget. Users have to go in and review forecast methods periodically to determine, does that method still work? Does it need to be changed to another method because the selling pattern is modifying? Does it need to be re-indexed? So Venture does also provide exception tools that we'll talk a little bit about in the future to identify what that variance is or find products that have a high degree of MAPE. So,
hey, we had a question come in on the forecast methods.
okay.
Can you explain how Sally and seasonal are different if seasonal is using last year?
Seasonal, Sally will only use the last 52 weeks of history. That is all same as last year, exact same sales pattern. Same as last year, we'll take a look at multiple years worth of history and use that to determine what is the seasonal selling pattern. If you only have one, it will be very simple and very similar to Sally, but it is really meant to take a look at multiple years of seasonal history, and it will trend towards your most recent year, but it is meant to review multiple years of history.
Great, thank you.
Jeff talked about default forecast methods as well and linking new products. So when users, we have the ability within Venture to assign a default forecast method that can be assigned at a company level, a category, a subcategory. So when new items are introduced, they will automatically default to this method until either a user goes in and changes the method, or the product has its own selling history that it'll begin to use. So these new items are introduced, the default method will automatically be assigned. One piece though is when you set these up, you set up a default forecast link or index. And so users need to validate that that index is correct, because a default index level at a category level might need to go up or down based off of the products that are entered. And so again, a key with your new products is to go in and monitor your mate to see if changes are needed, if that forecast method is correct, and does that index need to be modified. So I'm going to throw it back to Janine now, who's going to talk a little bit about SKU allocations.
Thanks, Linda. So SKU allocations are when you have colors and sizes or any other descriptor that you're using for the products that you carry. On the Forecast 21 side of the business, we call that mix percents. We call them SKU allocations in Venture. So in this screen, we have a colorful graph that displays, depending on how many SKUs you have with in this example, it's colors. And we give you a chart on the right-hand side that will display your historical performance by color in this example. And then we're going to show you what it's currently doing this week. You do have the option, though, to go in and add an additional allocation. So if you believe at some point in the future that the allocation needs to change because one color is going to be on the cover of a catalog or on the a landing page on the web, or it's just going to be focused differently, we give you the option to do that. You can come in here and make changes at any point. The other thing that you can do, there is parameter settings that you can put in so that the system will auto recalc that current mix percent based on X number of weeks of demand. So you can set that up to be updated automatically. All right. And then ultimately, you've managed your forecast method, you've allocated your SKUs if you have those in your business. And as Jeff mentioned in the beginning, we feed all of this information into master scheduling so that you have all of the exception reporting tools at your that you can work with, your hot list, and for materials planning, so you can see your entire planning horizon and where you need to purchase. And so the blue highlighted line up at the top of your screen when you're in Venture is a link directly into materials planning. So we try to save you some steps there so you can launch right into the screen instead of having to search for it on the menu. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it on to Stuart, and he's going to show you the application.
Thanks, Janine. I'm going to work in a sample dashboard and show you the different screens and concepts of Venture. Here's the Venture module. When you click on that, you have a number of different menu items. The primary screen you go to is Forecast Graph. And when you click on this, it opens up Internet Explorer. So now we see the main screen in Venture, and this does open in the Explorer. Here's the hierarchy section. You have your top merchandise, which is all of your products. And you see, as I'm clicking on here, these screens change. The forecast graph and the history. You could go in and review any of these. At the top, a category or subcategory level. Or expanding this, you could look at a particular product. So as we said, many customers go in and they click on a particular item to search. So you could click here and search for that product, and then you'll see that product come up here. And here in this drop down into your search history. So if you click here, you could see some of the items that you were looking at. You also have the ability to limit the products that you see here with this hierarchy filter. So here you could select particular status codes. Here's a status indicator. These are active, but you also have a number of different statuses here. So if I wanted to just see my R1 products, I could click that and then toggle the filter on and off. So now that that's there, I'm only seeing my R1 product. So it's a good way to limit how much you're seeing in your hierarchy. Toggle off, I could just click it there. You could also do a product search. So if you click product search, you could go in, you could put in a particular description. Let's say you want to look for shirts, or in this case, holsters or drills. You could put it in there and do a search. You could look at your last week's units. And if you click that, that would have greater than or less than to look at your high selling products. Or you could click here, let's say for vendor name. So if I want to look for a particular vendor, I could click it in there, hit search, and then that's going to show me, let me bring this down, all of the products for this vendor. I'm going to click and expand here so you could see more of this. So now, as we click on these, I could work my way down the list. You could also see here, it was a filter. I had this filtered before. Now I'm going to take off the filter. So this is showing me 100 of 494 products. I could load more data and keep loading more data. I could also sort. So let's say next 4 weeks units. I could click on that to sort ascending or descending. And then be able to look at it that way. There's also these different filters that you could use. So if you scroll here, you could see there's things like has history, the product status, the scheduler, whether it's a linked product or not. And in any of these, you could add a filter. So if I click in here, I could say 99, let's say greater than 99, and apply that filter. So now I'm just looking at my top items. Again, you could always take this filter on and off. You could also do grouping. If you're familiar with the grouping, I could bring product status up here, and then I could group on that. So that'll show me my C1s and R1s, let's say.
Stuart, we had a question come in. Is the
Sure.
grid, do you have the ability to export this to Excel?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't see a widget here for doing that, though.
But we will follow up and
experiment
and try and get back with something more than.
Then we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely a fair answer. We just, I don't know if you can highlight it and copy and paste and all that, but experiment with it, Stuart, and we can advise.
Okay. We could take a look at that.
Thank you.
So now I could go in here and I could clear these filters if I want and drag back this, and now go to hierarchy. So let me go to a particular product. So I'm going to click on this product here, this 53475. You notice there's a camera icon here. You could actually link to a image, or you could upload images. And then as you hover over it, you'd be able to see it. So it's just handy information to have. And that can be done in the dashboard, or actually there's a product image in here that you could work with administration. So let's take a look in detail on the different widgets that we have. The forecast graph is the main widget here. Let me just do one thing here. I just want to change this to full screen. There we go. This way we could see more of this. So this forecast graph is the main screen, and it's good to be able to see your sales pattern. So you see here the red line is your current date. This actually is an older dashboard, so we have older dates in here, but in yours it would be the current date. And if you hover over these dates, you could see the fiscal date and the start and end dates. Hover over each of these dots, you could see the units and revenue. And that's true for actual sales and then for your forecast. So to the right is your current forecast that's coming through. You have the ability to see. Go ahead.
I want to pause for a second for a question that came in, and I answered it with text. I'm not sure if it was viewed, though, but I want to make sure everyone gets it. The question is, on methods, what if you just want to use the actual sales of a different Leica product? And I went ahead and answered it, so I'll answer it for you. But that comes back to the concept of linking. And we had mentioned previously where you can link to a product, you can link to a hierarchy level. So if you link to a hierarchy level, you're linking to the average of that hierarchy level. If you link to a product, you will indeed take its actuals if you choose the method to do so. And then you can index it or not to inflate or decrease the actuals by period. So yeah, yes, you can absolutely do that.
And actually, we're going to have an example after this product of a new item with only a few weeks of sales that we are going to link. So you'll see that on the screen. So going back to this graph, you could see this in units or in dollars. If I click dollars here, I can now see the revenue. And also the history, we could see the revenue that's here. You have the ability to see trends. This is your trend graph, or year over year. So now, if you hover here, you could see the different weeks and different years, your sales history and your forecast. And you may have history here too for prior years. As Janine mentioned in the presentation, you could click legend to see what you're looking at. So you could see what these different colored dots are, the actual history or the work forecast. I'm going to go back to units and trend. So again, you can see this product seems to have a trend. It seems to have seasonality. I mean, starting with weeks 44 through 51. It did in 2009 and it did in 2010. And then we have that now into the forecast here in this future year. And down here in the history section, we could see by week the history and then the forecast. As we said, the new forecast is if I go in here and I change the method and I hit apply, and I'll show you that in a few minutes, you'll be able to see that new forecast. Your work forecast is what goes into master scheduling. And so if we go here, as we said on this link, I could click on this, and this should open the master scheduling, at least materials planning screen. And here you could review the demand that's put in here and then come back out. Okay, and as we said, you could see this weekly, monthly, or quarterly. Now let's go through this forecast method. We said that we could set a default method, and you could set that for at the top level or any level, either at the top category or subcategory. Everything below that that's set will inherit that top level. So if you have new products, it will inherit that level if you click this default method applied. And I'll show you all merchandise, getting organized, tool belts. So that is our subcategory here. That's where it's getting the method. If I click on that, I could go in and review this default. So the default method here is expert. If you have at least 2 years of history, the system will apply one of the statistical forecasting methods. If you have less than 2 years, but at least 1 year, the system will apply the 1 year seasonal, and it'll do that automatically. And if you have less than like 5 weeks of history, I think it's 5 weeks of history, system will use a simple average. And so that's the default method. You could change it at any of these levels. 1 year seasonal, same as last year, F21, or flat. So whatever you set this at, everything below it will inherit that level if you have the default method checked. As you're setting this method, you could set a different link. Here, I just wanted to use whatever is at the subcategory level, and then a holdout period. And the holdout period, we usually recommend 4 weeks or a number of weeks, because what that does is it throws out the most recent week's forecast. Sometimes you could have noise in here. You could have something that would basically, cause the statistical forecast not to be accurate. So that's why you use this holdout period that will ignore these first few weeks and then look back. Look back over however weeks you have this set for. I'm going to go back to this product. Is there
we had
a question? Yeah.
Yeah. Can a user modify the weekly forecast for a product? Which I believe you were kind of discussing there.
Well, when you mean by modify, do you mean to actually manually go in and make those changes? That would be in forecast adjustments, which you could do. Usually those forecast adjustments are for something in the future, so you know that's something you want to go in there and make a change. It would be very labor intensive to go in and actually make those manual forecast adjustments, if that's what people were asking about.
But there's other ways. I mean, if you think about the question broadly, can I change the forecast by week by product? I mean, you can. There's the adjustments Stuart mentioned. There's overrides, which we'll either get into today or in our advanced session, where you take an anomalous historical event and override it so that it's not included in a future forecast, which effectively is changing that product's future forecast also. So there's several ways to take back control, but it's always a balance between letting the system do its thing versus how much, how many touches you want to make yourselves, right? So go ahead, Stuart.
Okay. Here you see the default method is applied, and it's using this expert method. It shows Box-Jenkins. So there are two main forecasting methods within expert, Box-Jenkins or exponential smoothing. Not going to go into the whole math about it, but basically the system looks at patterns. It's looking for seasonality. It's looking for trends. And so it goes in there based on the history that's there to try to find this pattern. And this one seems to be a good forecast, or at least it's close. It's capturing the seasonality. These are grayed out because I am using this default method. If I uncheck this, I could go in there and then change this method. Another thing here is this confidence interval. This will show you on the screen the confidence level, the upper and lower. As it generates this forecast, it'll go in and throw out some of those high and low sales. And so that's what it uses to generate that forecast. If we take a look at the history here, so this is going over 2 years. The default was also doing that. We're looking at 2 years. You could see that this forecast is weighted more towards the most recent year. Okay, so here we had 46 and 17, the new forecast is 20. So even though it's going back and looking at 2 years, it's going to weight it towards the most recent year. Okay, and you could see how once we get into this peak area, it would go in there and it would generate that forecast. Now, if I wanted to, I could change the forecast method. I could go in there and make it same as last year simple. Same as last year is what we used for a linked item. And I'll show you that with another product. Same as last year simple says, take my actual last year sales and use that. And I could set an index. So if I wanted to increase it 20%, I could put 1.2. If I wanted to decrease it 30%, I could put 0.7. But I could go in there and hit apply. And this will now show you this new forecast that's here. And you could see it on the graph. And again, we could look at the legend to see the new forecast and the work forecast and hover over to see what those sales are. You could also see it here. So you see, here's our history, and it's 20% over last year. If I wanted to use that if I wanted to use this instead of the default forecast, again, you could go in here and play with these, click these, try apply, and see which one you like better, but I could hit save. And that'll now save the forecast. So you see now the new forecast is copied into the work forecast. This will now be used in materials planning. This will not default to the method, so this will stay as this forecast method until you go in here and change it.
Hey, Stuart, there's a question about when then will these changes be reflected in materials planning?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is an overnight process.
So master scheduling does need to run.
Scheduling needs to run, and the venture forecast needs to update, which is one of the other processes.
So the nightly processes must occur. Yeah.
Right. You would be able to see that overnight.
Thank you.
Okay, let's look at another product. So here's a product with limited sales. You only have sales over the last few weeks. We did use a default method. It did use expert, and it shows the simple moving average. So since there's few weeks of sales here, it's just going to show an average, a straight line average. Because we have a holdout period of 4 weeks, it's going to take out these 4 weeks and really only use this 2 that's here. So is this a good forecast? Well, we don't really know what this is going to do. But to me, you may want to link this to another similar product. And that's where I could uncheck this. Let's say I change this to same as last year and apply a prototype. And this says link, add link. I could go in here and do a product search. There's a tool belt. I could go in, hit description, and put in a tool belt. Or I might actually know the product itself. So I happen to know this product ID, and for many of you, you may be able to know one product that's similar to another, and I could select this product and hit apply. So now our new forecast is based on the linked history. And again, you would want to go in here, look at the legends, and this will show you your linked history, your actual linked history, which is linking the history for the last few weeks that's there, and then your forecast. So now you have this here, and it's going to use the sales of this linked item to generate a forecast going forward.
And that should address the question we had about using the history of another item to predict the future of another item. So,
right.
Thank you, Stuart.
Another method you could use is you could put a flat method in here. So again, we had 2 weeks of sale. We had 2 sales that were there. You could say generate a forecast of 4 units, say every 4 weeks, and apply that. And that will then give you this forecast that's here. And again, that's a flat forecast that you would use if you don't have other information. You could also check this. So you could say, once I get at least 8 weeks of sales, show me an average of, let's say, 8 weeks of history. So it will use this flat forecast until you get this 8 weeks of sales, and then it'll look at those 8 weeks of history and generate this average forecast. All right, any questions before I go to SKU allocations?
We're good for the moment.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm
Mhm.
going to go to this product here, this 94485. And if I click on SKU allocations, I could see my colors here. These are my D1, D2, D3. So show the color percents and the description. If you hover, it'll show you the description itself. That's not a good color for white, but I don't know if it'll show the actual color. But here you could see the historic and the current. And again, this is based on parameters. Now, let's say over the last few weeks, you've been promoting one of these colors. I could go in there and say, show me historically over the last 4 weeks what the historical is. I don't want to go back 52 weeks because now some of these are changed. I could then add this allocation to that week, and I could copy from historic. So now that'll be that new allocation here. Okay? You may also know in the future, maybe in the next spring, you want to put in a new allocation. Okay? Because you want to go in there and be able to adjust these amounts. So then you could go in and make these manual adjustments if you know that it's, changing in the future. The other option you have in size is you could apply a template. And templates you could set up to group together historical products and use that for new products. You could add an allocation from a template, and you'd have different templates that are set up at different levels. All right, any question on SKU allocation?
Nothing here.
Okay.
All right, so we just went through a real high-level basic elements of Venture 21, and we understand that there's a lot more involved with Venture. So what we'd like to do is we are going to have what we're calling a Venture 21 Part 2 webinar in the near future, and here are many of the items that we'd like to talk about. If you have any suggestions as to something that we've missed on this list that you'd like added to that webinar, please send it to us. That'd be great.
So thank everyone today, or thank you everyone for attending. We want to let you know that our next webinar is going to be held on June 19th. And if you have any questions that you forgot to ask and you think of them later, please send an email to your customer service consultant, or you can send it to our general email, customersuccess@softvision.com.
And that concludes it. Thank you, everyone.